So the struts, let's get these struts swung into place. I'm just going to lubricate the slot at the rear of the struts to start off with, because if I lubricate the slot at the front I'll end up rubbing all the grease off with my fingers and thumbs while I'm working on the camera, so that can be done later. Let's get this in the right way round. It doesn't want to go in past the catch for the front door, that's better. Let's get that. These extended to make sure they're sitting correctly. That looks pretty good. We have one screw at the top. That needs to be pulled in closer, that's better. You can even see the threads where it was sitting. One at the bottom. Two in the cassette well. And if some of your screws are ugly because it didn't go well when you were trying to unscrew them, save the two best for this position where they'll be seen. And the worst one can go at the bottom of the camera where the leather's going to cover it anyway, and no one will ever see it. So I'll get these 4 screws tightened. That's the struts done. Now I want to fix my front standard here, so I'll just collapse these struts, put my 4 screws through that hold this front standard to the focus mount. There we go, bellows all back, pulled up into position, everything looking nice. That's good. So that's our struts. Our focus here, our helical, I've got the inner and outer correctly aligned, so that where my alignment marks meet there, the inner and outer are dead level. That's where I'd marked it for. So I've got to put some helical grease on this. And here what I've got to achieve is back that out a good deal of the way. And this thread here on the outside has to screw in here. At the appropriate point, these pins here and here have to engage with these slots, and I know which way up that has to be because I'd marked that at the top, so basically it's going to be, it was there and there. And if I get it all right, I'm great. I could be a thread out here easily enough. I'll have to to and fro a bit until I get that to my satisfaction, but that should be good. Meanwhile, what other easy things can I be doing to go on with this? I could put the rewind in, I suppose, because the rewind is very non-controversial. Here's the bush. So I'll put some synthetic grease in there. got countersinks on one side, so you know that that's the side that's up, that the screw heads burrow into. Just lift that back. Yes, that's turning smoothly. That can go on the top of the body, right there. And I should have 2 screws to do that. Now these screws are not raised head screws, they're countersunk screws, they're flat on the top. And I should have 3 identical ones to do the film advance. Just checking that I've got them sorted correctly. Yes, I do. Okay, so that's the rewind in place. I can nip those screws up. The film advance, what have we got here? Well, these are the major components of that shaft. You can see how deep that spring has worn in to that surface. That would have been nickel plated. That would have been quite smooth at one stage. It's seen quite a bit of wear. I will lubricate that with graphite grease, I think. And of course I've got to get this spring pushed down over it, which is always a fight. This is where I get my hands all dirty, trying to fight this thing on. I'll just check this. So yes, I need the tag on the spring needs to be down at the bottom here. Let's put a bit of graphite grease on here. And see about wiggling this screw on, this spring rather. If I get it started, I can probably run round it and get it stretched on. It's going. Just running around it with the tip of my screwdriver. Pulling the coils of the spring over. That's it, it's on its way now. If I push against that spring and rotate this, I can probably pull that into position. I can. Let's see if we can do that in here. It might make it easier. Oh, it's snug fit. As I say, this has worn a channel for itself, so it's reluctant to for the spring to move down into place. That looks better. Okay. Now that presses on there and it turns smoothly with some resistance in one direction. In the other direction it won't turn at all. So that's all good. I'll apply some more graphite grease to that. And we'll assemble these two pieces together. That's good. Now to put that in place, I need to put my take-up spool in place, the film spool in place. So I want to apply a bit of synthetic grease to the base of that, where it runs on that spring in the back of the camera, and in the centre where it runs around that bush. Making sure I've got it the right way up, of course, because the slots in the top are driven by the film advance. Now I'll just find the pieces I want. I've got the 3 screws. I want that drive piece that drives that thing. Where is it? That's not the one I want. Where is it? There it is. I can assemble these 3 pieces together. Let's put a bit of synthetic grease on there for good measure. Run some in here and in those slots. So the spring goes on. This piece goes on. And then this piece goes on, and you'll see that as I turn it, it lifts those 2 things up out of the way. That can go on there now, and I've just got to engage that with the top of the film take-up spool. Of course, it's reluctant to go through the body, this thing, isn't it? Must be slightly misshapen. It's a tight fit. Oh, it'll go. Just needs some encouragement. There we go. Just check that that's in there, that's seated correctly. And there are 3 screws, of course, that hold this into the casting. That screw's not particularly happy looking. Must have had a hard life. Get this 3rd screw started and running. Yeah, it's running in okay. The head on this particular screw is a bit damaged looking. Not enough to cause me any problems. Just checking that when this is wound into the rewind position, this moves smoothly in the backwards and forwards. And when this is up, it has to be driven by the shaft here. Let's put that knob on the top, spin that round. Yeah, it'll only move in one direction, like that. That's nice and smooth, that action, that's very good. So that's the film advance component pretty much sorted out. This piece, of course, will go back in once we get to the top. Got to deal with the focus mount, and I might go and see how that door's cooking. Well, I think that'll pass muster, don't you? Looks far better than it did when I started, and I've just got to glue the leather back in place. You can see it's not dead shiny, but given the state of the surface in there, it's a pretty good result. You probably have to put spot putty in there to improve that. Alright, let's start with this lens helical. I'll just shift this out of the body. Now the inner and outer, I'm just checking I've got that, haven't disturbed that. No, that all looks good. So I'll apply some helical grease here in about half a dozen spots around the outside. You don't need to absolutely clog the helical with grease. That's counterproductive, it just makes it too stiff. Let's work that backwards and forwards to distribute that. Check that it runs smoothly. Seems to be good. Now, we've got the much finer thread round the outside of the outer helical here where it screws into the lens mount. The shutter mount at the front there, so I'll just put a bit of helical grease on that. And if I rack that right forward, I can get this started. Oops, I've just disturbed my inner helical from the outer there, so I've got to go back and check that I haven't just lost my alignment. No, that's good. So this should just screw in. Just backing it up until I get the start of the thread. Okay, that's started. And before it reaches the front of the mount, I should have reached the infinity position up here once I've got that piece engaged. So it's only going to go as far as that under any circumstances. So it can't be that position. I'm watching where these studs are in here that picks this up. It must be this position. There you are. So it would go there. That feels good. Now this piece, this is our focus scale ring. I've got the stop off here so I can manoeuvre things about easily. I've got to look for my alignment mark. I've got an alignment scratch there, and there's their mark on the thing right there. So that's where it needs to go. And there are 4 small screws. Now these screws holes they're all offset. It's to allow for adjustment of focus. It's a bugger of a system and one that they abandoned fairly promptly. But I'll get these 4 screws. You can tell where your screws came from because they're obviously used looking, the holes that they went through. Get those 4 snugged up. There's our stop here for the infinity position that I'd removed earlier. We can put that in place. And check that this swings smoothly, and it looks about right. I know that the inner piece was slightly high at the infinity position. That looks pretty good, and I know that the inner and outer are correctly aligned because I've checked my alignment marks. I know that my outer and the helical and the focus scale ring are correctly aligned, again because I put an alignment mark there. I know that the outer helical couldn't screw into the focus mount any further than that and still work. So I know that that's correct. I know that it was as close as it possibly could be because we had a slight scar mark on the front mount here, that front plate, which was due to insufficient clearance at this point. It means that this ring is probably slightly bent. If I slide a scalpel blade under there and lever that up slightly, that'll probably stop that scuffing completely. Yeah, that's good. So that's all good. Our focus mount's complete. It's moving smoothly, and that really only needs the front door fitted. And here's our front door, ready to go on. It's got a spring here which is entertaining to fit. And my first task is to stretch this over the front standard so that it clips in top and bottom. This spring I want to get tucked down inside this part here without scratching the paint off the body. Well, you can use something like a spudger. You can use a rule. I usually just use a rule to do this. I've got to get that spring tucked down in there without scratching anything. Of course, that spring is quite strong. I might need to use a pair of pliers to hold that down. And go and find some. So what I want to do is rotate that spring down, oops, and get that. You can't see any of this because it's wriggling out of the picture view, sorry. Let's get this back in place. Let's do this in a different order. Let's take this door off. I'll get it in here. I'll collapse the front slightly. Get that door hooked into the slots, top and bottom. Make sure that spring's tucked down. Push the hinges back where they need to be. And put those hinge pins in place. Very difficult to see what's down at the bottom of a small black hole, but hopefully that's lining up. It's looking hopeful. And at the bottom, the same. It's not lining up. That was because of the spring is pushing everything about. That looks right. There we go. Okay. So there's our front door. As you can see, we don't have a problem with rust anymore. So that required a bit of extra work because I had to remove the rust, mask it, degrease everything in sight. Had to mask off these struts either side, of course, so the nickel plating was still good. And it received one coat of etch primer and 2 top coats of acrylic lacquer. Had about half an hour baking in the oven at around 70 degrees centigrade or so, maybe 75. It's a nice hard finish. Hard enough to handle, hard enough to put glue leathers back on there without it all turning to custard. So that's good, and it's probably a better finish than it had originally. Certainly looks tidier like that now. However, let's carry on, put this thing together.